Hey everybody, this is Tom, and this week's character is Aryan for Chandler. Aryan is a human lizard folk hybrid. He's a fighter. He came along with one of the more concise descriptions out of all the winners so far, which is a good thing. Short and to the point, leaves me a lot of freedom in interpretation. But it's good. The thing that's it's a good combo having a simple description of an interesting character, which is a pretty good recipe as far as getting a brief for what to work on. So I figured I'd get pretty much straight into it. Really, a nice and straightforward approach to this character. Really coming down on this sort of approach to things. So starting off, going through, getting the email that the winner always sends. It's got as much information as they think that I need. If I ever come up with any questions, I ask them. And then once I've read it a couple times, I'll go in and I'll sort of go through it and edit it down to try to fit everything onto a page in a separate Word document. And then that way after I've got that, then I'll start on the image, just putting down a bunch of all the most point form sort of important notes, stuff that'll remind me of certain details or anything, and just so that I have everything on the one sheet so I can just hunker down and focus. Actually, before moving on, I wanted to mention this one thing in this character in particular. When drawing the body, he does have some subtle differences from being a human. Like he is pretty much 98% human, but he's got scales up his arms and the sides of his neck, and I interpreted the description of the hair as to being something kind of spiky-like, but I gave him sort of a thicker, meatier neck that's more kite-shaped, sort of like a Cardassian from Star Trek. But one thing I also wanted to make sure I was getting was lowering the waist a bit, especially after drawing the Goliath character. I have a tendency to draw the legs way too long, and it always feels right when I'm doing it, but then it looks really wrong when everything's said and done. So this guy does look, even to me, it still looks particularly low-waisted, but it's still within a human range, which is okay. I'm still not exactly sold on it. I like it, it works, but it was really strange, but I think important to play with that sort of aspect of figure. I go on and on all the time about using, like even just having a photo of a person, even if they look different from the character you're drawing, just to help ground you in that reality. Having variations of even like what do their abs look like? Because I mean, a pet peeve of mine is how like you see comic books and every superhero has the exact same arrangement of abs, but if you look at like a bodybuilding magazine, there's like weird wobble column style and offset stuff, and some are more visible, some are less visible, and some are jaggedy and some are square. It's so cool. There's and that sort of variation piles up and gets around on the whole body as far as things like lining up and different, like where people's fat deposits and everything, and even just like pushing the sliders here and there on the figure is, I think, important, even if you kind of ride that line between unnatural and natural, or like maybe a little bit too far. I think it's healthy to get there as long as you recognize what you're doing and you're doing it intentionally. When drawing anatomy, I'm guilty of this, but a lot of the time people will think, okay, the head, if we're doing 7 heads high, the elbow lines up with the belly button, the nipples line up with the second head down, and all that stuff, and you end up having all these figures that are perfectly proportioned in the same way, and it can lose variety. It's not very realistic. In a video game, it sort of makes sense because it's expensive to have more animation rigs made for different proportions, so it makes sense to have everybody on the exact same kind of skeleton. But for doing fantasy art, I think it's a really great thing to keep in mind, especially with how many races there are, like giants and halflings and dwarves and everything, and it's just, and there's so much room for variety. Anyway, so that's a big long rant about being low-waisted. Even though it's still really normal, it's sort of like there's a halfway point. It's it's really sort of natural to put the halfway point like somewhere closer to the crotch, but typically it's usually right between the belly button and the crotch, and that's kind of that's what I did for this guy. But it still kind of gets a little bit off. I wonder if that made any sound. My cat just rubbed the microphone. Hey, you, hey, over here. Come over here. Okay, see that? I'll try to. Okay, anyway. Okay, so back to the approach. So I like to start off with the pose. After getting a sense of the character, writing them out in my own words, or editing the big wall of text into something small, you get sort of a sense of who this person is. And then most of the character, a huge portion of it, I'm sure you've heard it before, is just how, I don't know what the ratio is, but just a massive majority portion of communication is body language. So when I do characters, I like to try to give them a suitable stance. Anything that fits their personality is kind of what I'm going for. A bit of extra kind of gravy is just something that, a pose that isn't the exact same as a character I've already done for the R&D fantasy project. But I mean, as long as it's just something that captures the essence of the character, at least somewhat is in that direction, then that's what I'm going for. In this case, he's been described as sort of an arrogant, chaotic fighter, so there's a level of confidence, and I just wanted that sure-footed, wide stance and the tilted slide look and the weapon cocked and ready to go, and just the proud, planted, sort of wild card guy. Not too crazy, though. I mean, he is still good. Even though he's chaotic good, he's still... Goodness can't go too crazy, I don't think. Yeah, starting with the pose. I used to try to draw everybody in the same kind of... almost T-pose, usually with the arms down, but you lose a lot in doing that, and it helps... If you're doing stuff in a concept art setting, it can really help speed up a character's development quite a bit if you can put in that sort of subtlety or that personality into the pose as well, and it can just look quite a bit more interesting. And then once I have the pose down, just to make sure that everything's lining up good, I'll put in the skeleton, and then to make sure the muscles on top of that line up, I just connect them to the points where they go and just make sure everything's working out. That takes a lot of getting used to. I think I've been improving at that throughout doing this, being forced to do it as often as I do. But I was looking through some magazines recently, and there's like some football players, and one of them just had like this overly muscular, lumpy arm, and I just was struck with how it's all still in there. Like, his skeleton looks the exact same as mine or yours, and the rib cage is... I mean, a bodybuilder or a really strong person's skeleton is a little bit denser and thicker, but it's not noticeable unless you're probably trained to look at it, or like you're a bone scientist, archaeologist type. But it was just weird to, like, you could see every sort of like lump and recognize what it was, and you could see where it was going, and it was just refreshing to just just to remember that even though you've got like any crazy shaped body and any crazy shaped pose is still based on this same underlying structure, and that can help a lot with getting rid of any sort of intimidation or anything. It's all just cylinders and blocks, and you'll get there if you keep working at it, and if you just sort of learn a good foundation, a good basis, and you get confident with moving it and like angling things and foreshortening, then you can draw any pose at any angle, and it's all the same sort of thing. And then once I get the muscular system done, I'll go over and do just sort of like an over skin pass. Usually people don't usually do overweight characters, and so for the most part, a lot of like muscle mass and everything gets sort of visible and shown through. I could just take the muscle layer that I draw and duplicate it and then make the muscle one invisible, and then, or just sort of erase different details and subtleties here. I'm hoping that eventually I'll have some heftier characters, just for that variety. They are fun to draw. My favorite, or well, some of my favorite like people to draw in life drawing are like older, overweight people. They just have incredibly dynamic bodies that are just they pretty much just draw themselves. But in this case, for these purposes, it's really just about sort of paving over a lot of like the more overly delineated details, I guess, like certain muscles and things are just, they're really subtle. One thing that is really tough to work on is legs. Legs are really powerful and have massive muscles, but even if you watch like athletes running, like high jumpers or something, or basketball players or anything, pretty much everybody's legs outside of bodybuilders are pretty plain. A lot of them just kind of sausagey, not too defined, just walking around. They just look kind of just really basic. And that's one of the tricky things about muscle, is that it doesn't have to be shredded and ripped and over detailed to look strong or to be strong, but it still kind of does because of that iconic element to it. Like you sort of, you see like a certain type of body and you sort of interpret or assume certain things about it. Even though like pretty pudgy, average, generic looking stuff can still be quite powerful. It's just sort of weird. It always drives me crazy when I've spent so much time working on learning about all the muscles and how they overlap and how they bulge, especially in the legs, because there's just a lot going on there. And then you feel like you got it, and then you see pictures of just people just doing stuff, walking around with their legs visible, and it's just throws it all out the window. It's just a lumpy thing. But don't get discouraged. So it's cool because even on like a simple leg, you can start seeing like the subtle shadows and being like, oh, there's where the major trochanter of the femur is sticking out, and oh, I can see where that's connecting there. And it's even in the subtleties that you can still pick out the details in it, and it's fine. So I guess I'm going to go over the description of the character that I got. So from Chan there, he sent me the character sheet, which was great. That can really help with just learning their stats and sort of exactly what objects might be on there. And usually in the write-up, there's a mention of the stuff that's really crucial, but then sometimes in the character sheet, there's like other stuff on there that might just be like a nice little bit of detail that you wouldn't otherwise have thought of. Okay, so this is the condensed version that he sent me. He's got reptilian eyes that are red. He's got red slicked back spiky hair. Fair-skinned, wears chainmail, holds a shield in one hand and an axe in the other. Small scar diagonal across his forehead. Usually smiling, has the air of overconfidence and arrogance. Wears a dragon pendant around his neck at all times. Has reptilian scales along his forearms as well as scales on his shoulders, going barely into the sides of his neck. Really happy that this lying half lizard. Okay, so yeah, he's half lizard guy. Okay, so yeah, that's all I got. So this is what I'm going on. So he's got a heavy wood shield, an axe, and this outfit of chainmail. As far as like the shapes, I've drawn two dragon folk characters. One is Dragonborn straight up. The other is a weird pterodactyl guy for a friend, so I'm allowed to say that it's weird. He knows that I think it's weird. He won fair and square. Didn't pick him because he's a friend of mine. Okay. Anyway, there's sort of an air of like a really iconic sort of cultured look that the Dragonborn are usually depicted as. It's something that's like very like tribal tattoo shaped, kind of bat wing scalloping and stuff like that. They're really kind of like 90s movie Klingons in a way. They remind me. So just with this guy being part lizard folk, I didn't think to ask how he came about, or like if he hatched from an egg, or even if dragonborns hatch from eggs. I think they do. Um, but I wanted something that looked like he had a bit of that racial pride, or like he might kind of admire a lot of, like being a fighter, he might admire a lot of like dragonborn qualities, like the strength and like the fighting abilities and ferocity and everything. And so I thought he'd probably adorn himself with um, uh, like items from that culture. So his outfit is sort of, I wanted just to have that pointy, angular, flared out, um, I guess tribal tattoo kind of look that I associate with Dragonborn stuff. I'm never going too explicitly canon looking with these characters, even though it is D&D. I like having it. I like trying to do it a bit differently. Something that can still work, but something that's still fresh. Something that's recognizable, but it's new to look at. So yeah, that's what this guy is. So I'm not going into the every time that there's a particular, although for that one character I did the little mirror on his belt, and that was pretty much exactly. Actually, there's been a couple times when I've done something that's lifted pretty much directly from the player's handbook, or the monster manual or something. But I really like going in and trying to make something look like more fitting to the world, or something that's just it could fit the description, but it's just been made by a different craftsman, and so I think there's a lot of room for like possible range of the appearance of things across individuals and centuries and continents and groups and whatever. It's just one of my favorite things to not only like to see people give a fresh spin to something I thought I've seen a million times before, but also just to try doing it myself. Like, what can people still, how far can you push the design's ability to be different from anything that you can recall, but also recognizable as the thing that it is. It's a fun puzzle. A lot of this is all just problem solving and puzzling out things and trying to find solutions that you think are interesting. So that's sort of what I was going with this general sort of outfit here. So I've got his arms visible. It would have been terrible to just pave over that description of his anatomy with the scales on his arms. I think it'd be fitting with his sort of arrogance and overconfidence to just have his a bit of a gun show going on. Same with like the low cut open shirt. Just it's sort of arrogance and greaseball-y kind of thing, but it's not like no big deal. It's no big deal or anything. But I just it made sense to me to have that. It's flashy. It's confident. It also even like not putting armor on stuff can make somebody look tougher, I think, anyway. I think that if somebody's going into battle without the armor on, then it kind of says something about the level of confidence they have. So as far as his outfit as well, one of the main descriptions was using chainmail, and it's going to be coming up a lot. This is another chance that I had to tie him in slightly back to that other Dragonborn character with the sort of long, they're called lames, Lames, just long sort of strips of metal, sort of bands of metal, I guess, that sort of get used and interwoven into chainmail a lot, depending on how big they are. Sometimes it's like, I'm hoping I'm right about this, is that it counts, but like Roman armor, how they had all those big, lames of metal, that like those scaled overlapping shingles kind of thing. I think, but yeah, so that comes up in a bit though. But I thought it'd be good to have, rather than just like when I think of chainmail, I think of like a big, like just a big coat of it, just flopped right over. But again, that's one of those things where you could just give them like a big hallmark of chainmail that would be practical. It's history proven to be practical and great and function well. But it's just a missed opportunity to try to inject some sort of culture or character into the piece. So in this case, to try to add some variety, I sort of snuck some under the leather, so it's like a stacked I was hoping it'd be like a stacked effect of with different sheets of leather between chainmail with leather and chainmail, and it'd have like a padding effect. But it would also look more decorative. You'd be able to see more fabric, more color, more flair, and it would be like a kind of a hot shot, like flamboyant outfit where it's as much about the fashion and the look of it as it is protection. And it also kind of helps to make them look a little bit less armored than you'd think, which might kind of drop somebody's defenses a little bit, might make them a little bit overconfident, which can be a weakness in the battlefield, I'd imagine. So yeah, once I've got a vague sketch of the costume, just blobbing in different parts of the silhouette, I like to colorize the areas, and then I've gotten really attached to this occlusion layer, which is basically just shadows, general shadows. It can help to keep from getting overwhelmed about shadows, to think of two different types. As I don't know if these are technical terms. This is just what I call them. I call them volumetric shadows and cast shadows. The volumetric shadows are the shadows that as an object sort of tilts away from you, from the light bouncing back at you, it darkens slightly and sort of goes around. It's like when you see a drawing of a sphere and it's got the shadow, it's darker around the edges. That'd be a volumetric shadow. It's shadows there that show the volume of an object. And then cast shadow is when something is just casting a shadow, whether it's a nose, something little like a nose or a brow or an arm. These are usually just harder edged, more stark shadows, much less subtlety. And usually starting with the cast shadows can help. Once you plant down the flag of the darkest shadow, it can help keep everything, I guess, proportioned as far as tone goes. I've got a really bad habit of rendering and keeping on coming back and just making stuff darker and darker, just because it just looks like it needs more shadow, because it's in shadow, so it makes it look like it needs more shadow. And being able to pull back and let light things be light and not get as dark as the dark things, that can be quite a challenge. So it's nice to, when you put down the darkest shadows first, it can help you just scale things and be like, okay, I don't have to get things that dark. That part I know is going to be the darkest dark on this whole thing. And then you can scale it appropriately. You got a better sort of mental image. It's easier to translate. Before doing all this, after I figure out the costume, I like to do the frame. I've mentioned the frame a lot. It just helps save time by, even though it's tedious, it just helps save time by making it so that I don't have to constantly clean up the edges around the figure. And then going through and just rendering. Light to dark usually helps once you get the darkest shadows in there. As far as the facial expression, I just wanted one of those sort of arrogant, I guess a smirk, or I don't know what you'd call that. I mean, it's definitely like a puckered mouth, but I don't know what the actual, it's just a smug kind of look that I was going for. His face actually didn't start coming around until right near the end, so I'll talk about that in a bit later. So as far as materials, sort of standard, very common Dragonborn. I noticed always a lot of leather, and in this case it would be kind of just stained bluish leather with maybe some mustard-colored deer leather around inside, and some golden silk that might have been nice at one point. So yeah, lots of tedious rendering and everything. So I'm only at about not even the halfway mark And this is definitely the longest, most tedious aspect of the process. I'm constantly trying to think of ways to shorten it or get faster. I mean, being able to accomplish things faster. I'm not trying to make these drawings go by. I'm still putting in the time, but this is a great section or a great project for doing research and development, which is why it's called R&D Fantasy. And being able to the one thing that I notice I am getting better at, which is great, is when it comes to this rendering stuff, is just getting to that right tone faster. So rather than putting in a bunch of kind of hesitant, softer, delicate, multiple pass strokes to build something up, I'm getting a lot better at just kind of sniping that one solid tone that I can just blob in a spot, and it'll do what I want, or it'll be what I need at that time and place. And that's going to save some time, and I think I like the look of that sort of as few strokes as possible kind of stuff, but not at the sacrifice of communicating volume and texture and lighting and everything. That all that comes with priority. So yeah, with the arrogance, it's sort of hard to say somebody who's good being arrogant. Usually that's we use the word confident for that, but who's to judge? But I thought flared out pointy shoulder pad sort of area would be suitable for this guy. It's a little bit villainous. It's within like the popped up collar. One thing that happens a lot is calling on contemporary ideas of fashion and how people interpret things and outfits and stuff, and putting it back into the design. But you don't want to get too obvious or too focused on what's trendy now, because that'll end up making your stuff look pretty dated in the future. I mean, I don't know if that's even inevitable. That might just be something that's guaranteed to happen. Actually, you know what, it probably is. You can look at stuff from like 10 years ago and it just feels like it's from 10 years ago, even though at the time it looked... I guess it's that futurism thing again, where you can look at a drawing of what the year 2000 would look like from 1920, and you can tell it was made in the 20s, even though it's futuristic. Or the 1960s, you can tell what their vision of the future... You can tell that when it was made... and I guess that probably happens with fantasy and also just medieval like documentary stuff, or like movies just set in like old-timey England and whatever. So maybe not worry about that too much. I could probably ease up on it. Just as long as the character's coming through, that's actually probably a valid dogma, I'd say. Just the story and character comes first, always. That's story and character is what any of this is about. Without just a character without a story is called an NPC. And I guess it's sort of hard to explain. A story. I don't even want to draw anything in my sketchbook unless it's got a little bit of a story to it. Unless I'm just doing like a mindless study. But every time I start sitting there and just doodling, I get stuck in a rut. It'll just throw me right off for the whole weekend, or for just for days at a time. I like to have a mission. Having a mission of what to draw is so crucial for me. Anyway, it's fun. It's drawing for a reason, trying to solve a problem, trying to depict a character, or trying to tell a story is a really great way to draw if you're having trouble. So yeah, lots of rendering. Always coming back to parts. Usually the stuff that I always get coming back to is lighter materials like his skin, and then just darkening it and darkening it and darkening it and darkening it. And even like this arm gets really dark by the end, just the underside of it. And I don't think I took it too dark, but it's always sort of scary. It's always scary. But in that case, I'd recommend pulling back and doing more of the character in less detail. You get a much better grasp on where everything should be going, and sort of being able to self-critique on the fly. And don't fixate on stuff. This is something I'm still ranting and raving about. It's something I'm still learning about. Is just if you're getting stuck on something, move on to something else. It'll still look wrong later. Don't worry about forgetting about it, and just get it done. And once you have more stuff done around it, the rest will fall in a lot quicker. Even if you have, like, what it's I heard this some it's kind of like some financial advice I heard once, where it's like if you have a lot of debts, like pay off the small ones first. It's sort of like that. Like once you get rid of just kind of like all these dumb little moving parts, then you can sort out the real problems with a lot more clarity. And that, I think, is the case with figuring something out on a piece of art. So yeah, let's just build up color. One of the things that comes up a lot is after you've gotten to a certain point, it's really nice where you can just draw a blob of color and then take a second color and go and add in detail, and it's pretty much done. That's always a nice feeling. I don't remember. I think it usually happens on every character, but I'll point it out if I see it. But that's a satisfying thing. Yeah, lots and lots of tedious rendering stuff. The good thing is that it's fun. It's pretty meditative and just relaxing. I mean, that's actually probably more stressful than relaxing, but it's a good time to just put on a documentary or a talk show or some music and just zone out and just put the shadows where the shadows would go if this object was in front of you. So it can be good. It can be good. And it's actually helped quite a lot doing these videos, because now I've got a much better sense of how long something is going to take. That was one thing that I've always dreaded as an artist, and like ever needing to do freelance stuff, is if somebody asks you how long does it take, it always came across as borderline offensive, where it's just like, oh, come on, guy, you can't rush art. But now, or like you can't schedule it. It just comes, and I don't think I was ever that big of a diva. But now I've got a good idea of like, yeah, I could get a lot done in 6 hours. Or if I put on a documentary and it's like 2 hours long, I can be like, okay, yeah, I'll be done before this plays off, because now I've finally got a much better sense of exactly the time. One thing that I've got going on is I have just a Casio watch, and I set it to go off every hour for 10 hours, and just having that like ramming speed kind of rhythm going, it's just nice to be able to tell the time, and it kind of helps me keep track of things and get a better sense of how I'm doing and how I'm working, and that comes in handy. I mean, that sounds like weird like Rocky Russian training, mechanical, weird, a little bit over the top kind of stuff, but I just think I just started doing it by accident because I forgot to turn my alarm off one time, or I didn't know that I had set it to go 10 times, and I was too lazy to stop it. I just kind of like when it beeps, but then I realized that it was kind of helping, so I kept doing it. Yeah, it's fun. It's kind of like getting little achievements throughout the whole process. So while this is all rendering out, I think it's pretty straightforward. One thing I've done this week, I've started doing, and I think I probably want to do it a lot more, is opening up things for questions. I'm so afraid of repeating myself and just saying the same stuff over and over and over again, which obviously happens a lot if you've been watching these. There's a lot of similar themes that pop up. So I want to get a chance to answer people's questions in depth and not just in tweets, and hopefully not just ramble on aimlessly about watching someone render a character for an hour. Okay, so I'll just go through them as they come, and if I don't get any today, I've got a document where I'm adding them all, and I'll get through them all. So that if you ask a question, it will be answered, as long as it's I guess there's no rules yet anyway. So just if you ever have a question, always feel free to ask in the question or in the comments or on Twitter or on via email if you found it somehow. I love answering questions. I absolutely love it. Okay, so lovely Liddy asks, she says, I do have a question about document size. What do you typically start out with, and what do you do if you are making a large pic? All of these are done on 8.5 by 11 at 300 dpi. That's just because I grew up drawing on 8.5 by 11 sheets of Xerox paper. And so I've just got a really good sense of the scale and what I'm doing. And it doesn't tax my system too hard as far as resources go. And yeah, it's a size I'm comfortable with, and I'm happy with the size that it puts out, and I think it works good. If I was making a larger picture, I'd usually, it depends exactly on what the project is. I think usually 11 by 17 is pretty good. It's really large. But if it's for like a poster, like 18 by 36 or whatever have you. Typically, like a good rule of thumb is just whatever you're working on, whatever you're assigned to do, and it's going to be printed. Or basically, even if it's not printed, just always work double what you need, at least. I like to do triple sometimes or quadruple for different things. But just the larger you have the resources to make things, or that your resources will allow you to make it, you should just make it basically the biggest size you can make it. Just that way, in case something comes up and it needs to be printed or enlarged, you're not screwed. You can always, you can't up-res stuff, but you can always down-res stuff. And then even if you do something large and then shrink it down to size, it always looks better. It's like a magic spell that happens. It just makes things turn out a lot better when you shrink stuff down. So Jeff Vares asks, I'm thinking about upgrading to a Wacom Cintiq. What hardware do you use at work and at home? So at work, both at BioWare and my current job, I am using a 21 or 22 inch Cintiq, just Wacom Cintiq. That's pretty much been the case for like 10 years. Or no, not that long, but I think the first time I used a Cintiq was 10 years ago, but as a regular part of my job, it was like 6 years ago or so, 6.5. But yeah, so I use large scale Cintiqs like that at work, but at home I just have the 13-inch Cintiq Companion that I got a couple years ago. I'm pretty sure it's first generation, maybe. I just got the base model. It doesn't have the Android one or the laptop one. And yeah, that's what I use at home. I found that, the price point was an obvious factor. That was probably the main. Yeah, it was definitely the main factor. It's only $1,000 or so, or like maybe $1,100. When the larger ones are more like $2,500. That's Canadian though, so it's all cheaper in the States. But it's less than half price, and I never draw the big long large lines, so I never needed one, and it has sort of like a retina display, like a really high density pixel count, so you don't really see the pixels, and it's basically like somebody put a Cintiq into a shrink ray and change the bezel and where the buttons are. I never use the buttons ever, so it's no big deal to me. But the 13 HD works perfectly. I would recommend it entirely, especially just the money alone is just ridiculously worth it. Okay, so one thing that's changed with the character here is with the hair. Because he's got the lizard folk blood in him, or the genetics, and the hair was mentioned as being slick back and spiky. I kind of interpreted it and saw it as a good example to have something that was almost more like weird filament hair. It's still really thin, but I pictured it as being something kind of, I guess like the closest thing I can think of would be like Kerrigan from StarCraft, but not as gross or dreadlock sized. It's just, or like quills of some kind, sort of soft porcupine quills that go back. So they're sort of like weird long tube-shaped scales with points on the end. So they're just not as thin as hair, but they're still just, they serve as hair. So that's what I was thinking with this guy. And it took a lot of iteration to get the hair going back the right way. It might just be me and how I see things, but slick back hair has an 80s villain feel to it, and it's really not a cool kind of haircut. It's always bad guys and sort of dorky guys usually in media that I've seen growing up. And so it took me quite a few iterations to get it to a point that didn't look like weird, dumb, like hockey hair kind of. I mean, mullets can be cool, especially in fantasy. They actually work really well in a lot of fantasy stuff, especially with fighters, but it just took a lot of iteration to get the feel of it right. And then I was happy with it, and it worked out good. Later, beard comes in, and it helps out even more. Oh yeah, one thing I forgot to mention is I also I gave him a really overly connected earlobe. It's subtle, and it's not a big deal. Nobody probably even noticed it, but it was just another one of those things to just make him look a little bit off, a little bit inhuman. Okay, so this looks like a pretty hefty question. Matt Rhodes asks he says, tell us about the psychology of color, how you became a scientifically minded artist, and what IP you'd love to work on most. The psychology of color. The psychology of color is pretty important, pretty useful, I would say. I don't call on it too much deliberately, but it definitely is a great standby that comes in handy all the time. So ignore a bunch of what I just said. So the psychology of color is basically the inherent meaning and subconscious reaction to color based on what culture you're in. Typically, the one example I can think of that kind of breaks the mold a bit, or like causes you to think about how much range there can be in this sort of thinking, is the color white, which is how to word this. So the color white in parts of India is what you wear to funerals as like the color of death. It's like what they wear when they're mourning. But in the West here, white is like a color of light and life. And like babies get wrapped up in it. It's clean, it's bright, it's angelic. And so that's sort of like a distinction there. So it's good to sort of explore it how different places do things if you're interested. I don't know what you'd look up for that. But in the West here, it's actually probably more obvious to you than you'd think. If you'd have something like red, it's exciting, it's invigorating, it's aggressive, it's powerful, it's ferocious, really. Red, blood, fire. It comes along with these things like volcanoes erupting and red things, and I think you can kind of see it. Stuff like a soft baby blue. It's like a color that you see a lot in nurseries and hospitals. It's calming, it's relaxing, it's gentle. Yellow is friendly and fun and energetic and positive and uplifting. Gray is serious, somber, mature, practical. These are the sort of things that I guess it kind of points to a larger rule. Breaking the rules in concept art on purpose is the exact same thing as obeying the rules. If that makes sense, let me explain. So, if I was given a brief for designing a secret human society that serves as intergalactic or interstellar police force and immigration board that operates out of New York City with high technology and all that and sort of that sort of stuff. Basically, Men in Black is what I'm talking about. I would come up with this, like, just by default, just without thinking. I'd come up with like cool like power suits and technology gizmos and everything. But the way that they actually did it was just suits, just plain suits. It's that sort of anti-design, that contrast between what you would expect and what they are, that serves as brilliant storytelling and design. I mean, if you understand the characters deeper than just that one sort of superficial description that I gave, or at least that view of the character that I gave you, it'd lead you with a very different thing. But breaking that rule, that expectation, is something that falls right into better character design. So with that in mind, it's just kind of like, if you know how people are going to interpret colors or how that's subtly going to affect them, you can play that to tell something about the character or to hide something about the character, which is the benefit of the psychology of color. One example I used in a character was Alden, the halfling chef, with the orange and red, or the like the yellow and red silk stuff. Yellow and red are colors of they're appetizing colors. That's why when you're in the candy bar aisle or the chip aisle, it's all red and yellow. Or fast food restaurant logos, or frozen food packaging, it's all red and yellow. That's part of the psychology of color. It's a big part of advertising, and it works. There's a lot of I want to say scientific, but I'll say quote unquote scientific research on it, just because it does vary from age to age and from culture to culture. But there is some stuff that kind of stays pretty consistent. Like, in most case, I think you could really reliably use black as like an intimidating kind of death, like warrior color, and red is always beautiful and exciting and alarming wherever it goes. I hope that explains that. So, how I became scientifically minded, or how I became a scientifically minded artist. That's a big question, a hard question to answer in one little quick thing. I'll move on to the next part of his question real quick here. What IP would I love to work on the most? I would very much like to... It's sort of weird. I mentioned it twice in this video already, and I haven't mentioned it in probably about a year. It was Star Trek. I would love to be in charge of a new show, a new Star Trek show. It would be set 10,000 years in the future of Star Trek: The Next Generation, and Data would come back. They would find Data, and so it'd be a chance to take what we know, throw it out the window. Basically, it'd still have to work as something recognizably Star Trek, but it would be 10,000 years in the future, and Data has survived, and he's been alive and conscious this whole time, and he comes back, and he's like, there's this massive ship, and it's just like kind of stupid, like sci-fi, like huge ship, and it's just him. It's like he's piloting it, he's made it, it's his own design and his own craftsmanship, and he comes back and they find out that it's him, and how much the world has changed and everything, and that'd be a fun IP to work on. I should have thought about this question before I got it. I can go over it. Maybe I'll have Matt over sometime and we can both talk about this stuff. So I'll put that quickly, just about how I became a scientifically minded artist. Yeah, I still don't know how to answer it. There's so many different ways I can take that. One thing I'd say is a lot of it comes out of creature design, and having such a love of seeing how animals are shaped and behave for their environment, and how it's such a perfect tool for designing creatures, where if you design a creature just thinking, what does it eat and what eats it, as like, there's a lot more to it than that, of course, but starting with those two questions, you can just explode and you can just run like 200 million years of evolution and survival into this species and just come up with like the shape of the claws, how much hair do they have, would they need hair, where do its eyes go, how tall is it, how does it get away, what eats it, does it run, does it fight, and just thinking about real, just how the real world works and trying to apply that into fiction. That's the point. I mean, fiction is supposed to tell us about the real world. It's supposed to feel real. Fiction only works when you can relate to it, and we can relate to it when it feels relatable, and things that are relatable because they're real feeling. And if you can do whatever you can to imbue a fictional world with just an effort of putting in as much of that sort of fidelity that real life has, I think that can only make it better. And that's, I'll invite Matt over and we'll have a big talk about this, and I'll think some more about what other sort of IP I'd like to work on, because I know there's one on the tip of my brain, but I just can't think of it right now. So I'll set that one aside. I'll come back to that one. Maybe I'll have to turn that question back around on him too. Back to the character here. So the description involved a dragon pendant that he had. So I gave him just this sort of simple-ish sort of bronze dragon. I didn't give it wings, and I hope Chandler isn't mad, but I did have a reason for it. I figured without his own explicit description, I sort of interpreted it as being like kind of this ancient old world dragon symbol of something that gets worshipped, and it's like a primal dragon. It's ancient. It's sort of another part of his like dragonkin pride, or lizard folk pride kind of stuff. And so the design of it, I didn't put any wings on. I wanted it to be kind of like a primeval dragon, like something that was like before they ever had wings. Like maybe this dragon was like the first dragon, and wings were his idea, and his offspring had wings and that kind of thing. So it's just sort of like, it's like the worm, and it's so something I just wanted it to be like ancient and distinct, and that's where that came from. Okay, there was one question I wanted to jump to that came up that's important, because I've been mentioning tutorial videos and videos that I want to make, but I haven't done them yet. So from Charm Cuisine, I'd like to know, which topics are you planning for your tutorial section, or is this canceled completely? It is definitely not canceled. I'm going to make a whole bunch of tutorial videos. I was super gung-ho about it at first, and I had all these great ideas, but the more I got into it, the more I realized that each one is going to take planning. It's going to take notes. It's going to need stuff that I'm going to need to write out and structure, and I'm going to need examples, and I'm going to need resources on the ready, just so that they're not just me sitting around blabbering on and Googling things and saying, hold on, let me just pick that up, and or just meandering and everything. Tutorial videos are... I'll look up tutorials, but I really don't want to have some guy spending 12 seconds saying, hey, this is me, here's a big long intro. Tutorial videos, I think, should always just get right to the point. They should be more like a lecture where it just dives right in. You got an introduction, you got like your 3-act structure basically, and then your conclusion, and it just sort of goes through it. And I really want to make them better, and finding the time for those has been difficult, but they will be made. They are absolutely not canceled. They are coming. So I hope that helps. I just want to make them worthwhile. And also, I do have a short list of topics, but please, if you have anything you want to learn, or hear me talk about or rant about or rave about or anything, let me know on Twitter or in the comments here. I absolutely am dying to hear from you. I love getting that sort of questions out because it's nice to have those sorts of ideas. I've got about 10 pretty solid ideas already. But yeah, always feel more than welcome to ask me for all that stuff. So the shield here, heavy wooden shield. It's designed to be a heavy wooden shield. So he's got this metal edge around it, used for bashing and stopping weapons and things. The curved side, sort of towards the back end near his elbow, is sort of like a blade unto itself for like back swings. I wanted a shield that was shaped interestingly, kind of lopsided and wonky. I didn't want to just draw like a simple round shield or like a rectangular shield. I wanted it to have a distinct shape to it. I mean, it's not going to shock the world with how it's shaped or anything, but I just wanted it to be a bit wonky and lopsided. It's more of a weapon. It's like I wanted something just energetic looking. So it is heavily wooden, but I draped I stretched some leather across it. We got studs at the bottom, mostly for decoration, and then with the leather on top, and then it's got a sort of a gouge in it. And these are some studs holding it all together, keeping the metal from bending inwards and keeping the leather sort of pushed in. And then just to make sure that Chandler didn't feel ripped off, I put some holes, some marring into the leather, so there's a big kind of X hole in the middle of the shield, where the leather's kind of punched and cut clean open, and there's a gouge through the wood, and then an arrow hole just above that where he took an arrow there. In real life, this shield would be much more bent out of shape, but I wanted to keep it simple. It's not going too crazy. It might have been recently reskinned, so it's still heavy in there. It's all good. Another good question here from Colin Kirkland is, are you ever going to do a sci-fi special? I've got an Imperial Guard. I've got an Imperial Guardsman from a Dark Heresy game I'd love to have drawn. I am certainly considering a sci-fi special. I usually get into the sci-fi mood in the summer sometime. If that ever comes up, it will be blatantly announced. So we'll see how that goes. Yeah, I think it'd be fun. Well, I'll keep you guys. I'll keep everybody up to date. So I'm going to store the rest of the questions for now, and I'll get back to them throughout the videos. Hopefully I'll just get lots more, and then I'll just go through as we go. So thanks a lot for all the questions, everybody. I've got about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 in total here. But we'll get through them all. I don't want to detract too much from the characters being drawn. One thing it's just not fair to them. It's not. We'll find a balance. One thing that I also found was with his face, it looked really old. He is only 20, 21, 20-ish, and his face looked really old for a long time. I think he's got sort of a pointy nose pointing down. It's kind of like a hooked old lady nose, and then he had all these like sort of deeper, wrinkly, like old British miner kind of cheeks. And once I softened out the features, and then put in the blush and the blood under his skin in the parts and sort of added that life back in. But then the beard on top really helped kind of hide a lot of his features and made him look a bit younger again. So it's kind of hard to maybe age him exactly, but I'm finding that like people in the early 20s that's a really hard age to kind of pin down. Old people and middle-aged people like 50 to basically 40 and up is easy, but in their 20s and as young as it's hard to capture that, but we'll get better at it. So that is Aryan Rosso for Chandler. It was a pleasure to draw this guy. Very interesting as always. So this was for the free weekly character art lottery on Twitter at R&D Fantasy, held every Monday. Just on Sundays I announce what hashtag to tweet. and then you have until Tuesday, before Tuesday. So Monday at midnight, at the last minute of Monday nights, that's the cutoff. And so all day Monday, you got to tweet the hashtag to enter. And if you win, I draw your fantasy characters for free. Any original fantasy character, free of charge, just like this. We're doing everything. So everybody's welcome, and it's been a blast so far, and thanks to everybody. So hope it helped. Thanks, everyone.